mind is terrifying. It is the absolute power behind what makes us, us. It is the unquestionable authority of our movements, of our decisions, of our identity. Nothing rules above our mind. So what happens if that power crumbles? What happens if it shuts down our movements, if it impairs our decisions, if it forgets our identity? What happens if our minds plunge into insanity? When the power that rules over all imprisons us in unfamiliarity. It's a cold, icy prospect, isn't it? And we've seen its victims all throughout media, yet somehow they are treated in most of them as a gag, a punching bag we can shoot spitballs at because they're cuckoo, they're nuts, they're not like us. They say silly things and do silly things, and that is funny to us. Yet seldomly do we get to explore these characters in a darker light, the sadness and the horror in being a prisoner to one's own mind. And it is funny that a character where we get to explore this tragedy comes from what people love to call children's media. There's this little show called Adventure Time, a fun, silly little show that engages viewers with its out-of-this-world antics and fun-to-follow story threads. It's a great show, you should check it out sometimes. It's your normal cartoon with the run-of-the-mill villains like zombies, monsters, and natural disasters. Among these villains, we have a recurring character that serves as a common nuisance to our heroes Finn and Jake, a blue, goblin-like wizard wearing a golden crown from a kingdom of snow and ice. He's called the Ice King. When we get introduced to him, the third episode, he is a two-dimensional villain that has a simple, straightforward motivation: steal princesses, lock them up in his dungeon, and eventually marry one or quite possibly all of them. And that's it. He is your normal, vanilla bad guy that the good guys beat up to save the day. That's the Ice King until the end of the show. All there is to it. Right? Admittedly, when I first watched Adventure Time as a kid, and even after rewatching it sometime when I was older, I was super annoyed with this character. And he was designed that way. Even in universe, our heroes see him as a pest, constantly there to ruin people's day. With the incessant kidnapping of people, his nonsensical reasons for doing such acts, and the way he treats the other characters that flip-flops from bumbling idiot to murderous hysterics. We are first introduced to him in the episode Prisoners of Love, where Finn and Jake encroached in his kingdom. Immediately we get the scale of the threat he is. Powerful with his magic, yes, yet he remains unserious due to his, what we can assume at the time, senility. Still, we remain unsure if that makes him incompetent or even more dangerous. Because even from that short introduction of him, we get a clear peek of the cruel acts he's capable of. Imprisoned in his cell were princesses, and for weeks he kept them there. What is scary is that he wasn't outright malicious, because apart from unfulfilled threats, he merely asked them questions about themselves in order for him to choose the right one. He was awkward, socially inept, with no semblance of normalcy in his actions, and that's the main cause of the tension for the episode. He was some sort of ticking time bomb. One moment he's a crazy old man, the other an imposing wizard who has the ability to freeze them all without any sense, or rather, capability of hesitation. In later episodes, we see him harnessing many different powers such as flight, ice lightning, and a whole host of abilities granted him by the crown. In any other cartoon, he would have been the making of a serviceable villain, imposing enough to be the conflict of an episode and hollow enough to be a throwaway character that the heroes forget about after he's been defeated. Well, in any other show, but this is Adventure Time we're talking about. Because even in the first episode, we get the base of what made the Ice King more of a character than another plot device. There is a lingering sadness whenever we see the Ice King in the first couple of seasons and episodes. A feeling that we don't get to see too often with characters that are like him. In the first episode we see him in, a cosmic owl calls him a sociopath, but I think that isn't the case. He experiences emotions such as regret, guilt, and even humiliation, though they are sometimes fleeting. It is clear from what we can get in episodes involving him that he goes through bouts of depression, which can be traced from his ever-changing body proportions that goes from bone-thin to round and hefty due to his emotionally influenced diet. In the episode The Eyes, we can see this sorrow quite clearly. The Ice King stalking Finn and Jake disguised as a horse to learn the secrets of their happiness. And even at the end of the episode where he finds both protagonists' secrets to being happy, he simply says,
"I'm still not happy."
And who would be, honestly? Could you imagine being virtually alone for 1,000 years in a kingdom of ice, but no one but a bunch of penguins you can call as companions? And this loneliness eats at him, making him act out, making him go to unhinged lengths to experience companionship, like in the episode Still, where he froze both Finn and Jake and crashed in their treehouse to get to know these friends of his a little better. This could also explain his compulsion to kidnap princesses to marry. Though he was conflicted to stay loyal in episodes like When Wedding Bells Thaw and Loyalty to the King, there was a semblance of normalcy to him, like when he had someone to be with in the episode Princess Monster Wife, where he treated this crime against humanity with utter love, care, and understanding. This isolation also has manifested itself in other weird hobbies, such as him keeping a diary, both in writing and in recording. In the various videotapes that we can get to see in the episode Holly Jolly Secrets, we can see his daily life, where his insanity takes him. Acting out plays with Gunter, dressing up as other characters and singing, crying uncontrollably for hours on end. It's disturbing in a way. He also shows signs of dementia, often forgetting the whats and whys of his activities, which also becomes more of a focal point for his story. The more we peer into the character, the more we can sympathize with him, because the guise of an imposing two-dimensional villain crumbles, and the bricks of what show creator Pendleton Ward called a pathetic character are exposed. Even in a universe where the heroes usually beat up the old coot, gradually they learn to just pity him in the same way we do, their punishments becoming less fitting for a criminal and more for a misbehaving child. Still, these depressing aspects of the Ice King are usually coated in bright, vibrant paints. Although I said earlier that this show explored his insanity in a darker light, it's still a kid's show. And as the Ice King grew more into his shoes to fill, he became more lighthearted and even comedic at times. His quirky and borderline unhinged nature has been used as the core of some of the show's comedy, which was effective when viewed with the lens of a child. But rewatching this show as an adult, it's hard to laugh without the burden of the knowledge of who this character was before the insanity. There was a turning point after the Lich appeared in Adventure Time. Something transformed in the TV show that would catapult it to the stratosphere. I mentioned earlier that the Ice King, in the stupor of his insanity, records himself in videotapes. Well, we get to see them in the two-part Christmas special of the third season, which at first was your typical storyline. Finn and Jake comes across a briefcase which contained the Ice King's evil tapes. Determined to find out his secrets, the two heroes set out to watch all of them through the pain of watching this old, decrepit man's daily life of lunacy. The Ice King, intrigued and unaware, tries to get in the treehouse and watch the tapes with his buddies. When he finds out that it was him that they were watching, the Ice King covers the land in snow and laid siege. Eventually, he does manage his way inside, but it was too late. He begs the two to not play the final tape, to not uncover his deepest secret. They played it anyway, and
Hello, my name is Simon Petrikov.
when I was a kid, this didn't hit as much as it should have. The significance this has on the show. This was the first glimpse we have of the Ice King's past. A ghost, if you will, for when we first see Simon, he was unrecognizable. He was intelligent and coherent, his way of speaking well put. An antiquarian study who dedicated his life into finding ancient and magical artifacts out of fascination. He was all of these things until he stumbled across the crown. From what the tapes show, we get to piece together the catalyst of the Mad Ice Wizard. As a joke, he wore the crown to play around with his then fiancée, Betty. That's when the visions started. The secrets, the creeping claws of insanity that turned Betty away and slowly transmogrified the man into what we know him now as. It was haunting. Hearing him confess that he was scared, that the visions that appear even without the influence of the crown beckons him to learn its secrets, to use its powers. Even more so, it was heart-wrenching. Listening to the once complete man begging for forgiveness for whatever transgression he may commit in the future, begging for people to watch over him as he descends deeper into the madness. Still, he hopes that one day, Betty, his princess, will return to him. In between these tapes, when the Mushroom War tore up the world and created the land of Oo as we know it as, Simon survived thanks to the grace, or rather the imprisonment, of the crown. He traveled by his lonesome for a while, his skin blue and his beard already coming in. That's when he took in an orphan little girl named Marceline. Together they traversed the horrifying wreckage of the world, and Simon protected this child from the emerging monstrosities and the horrors of loneliness, whatever the cause may be, even if that means putting on the crown and slowly edging towards the spiral even more. Even if that means leaving the little girl behind to shield her from the impending danger that he is becoming. For 1,000 years after, Simon would be forgotten by all save one, imprisoned in a body he does not recognize. It is a cruel fate to be subjected into viewing the world in crude, hazy lenses and in memories that fade as quickly as they are created. It is even crueler, then, to be left at the wake of its consequence. For briefly in the episode Betty, the magic of the crown was undone by a being called Bella Noche, which consequently brought Simon back into Oo, at death's door. He does not remember his time as the Ice King, yet still he knows that he has committed various atrocities. And in the self-loathing that extends to 1,000 years in the past, he asks for forgiveness to his fiancée. To talk about Simon, we must also talk about Betty, Dr. Petrikov's assistant and princess. When she was brought into the land of Oo, she dedicated all of her time there in rescuing Simon from the clutches of his captor, the crown. A crown whose initial purpose was to grant the wish, the deepest desire of its owner, broken by an abused dinosaur, which I don't have time to talk about. This was her mission, as she cannot bear to see the man she once loved reduced to a pathetic husk of a man who couldn't even remember her. and that spiraled her down to her own path of madness, obsessing over the return of her beloved that she herself dipped into lunacy. And from that, she made quite possibly the greatest mistake to ever be committed in U. For where madness lies, chaos follows. And where there is chaos, there is. From her desperation, Betty summoned the only force she knows to bring back Simon, a force above even from beings like Prismo and the Lich, plunging the land of U into cataclysm. She did technically succeed in bringing Simon back, breaking the crown and reverting them back into their bare essentials when they were being digested by Golb. Every moment after Simon first wore the crown was hell for both him and Betty. And in the belly of chaos, they share their only respite in each other's arms. 1,000 years of insanity, awaken only to be gone again. That would have been a cruel fate. Yet somehow, Simon finds himself in despair a little longer. Hope somehow came from the outside, and the two were seemingly given a chance to escape the belly of the beast and be together again. But yet again, their selflessness collided, and Betty won in the end. Gambling her life once more, she takes the crown and stayed inside Golb in order to save U, in order to save Simon. But the Chaos being was too powerful, even for the crown, rejecting the wishes of Betty, and it seemed that there was no other way to send Golb away.
I wish for the power to keep Simon safe.
Betty wished for the power to save Simon, and that power was Golb. And that is what she turned into. Simon, powerless once again, stares at what his princess has done, has become. While the entirety of U celebrated the banishment of the beasts, the once shriveled husk of an ice wizard has now become a shriveled husk of a man. That was the original ending of Adventure Time. Simon, who was once imprisoned by the crown, has now been imprisoned in an unfamiliar world once more. In Fiona and Cake, we get to see the aftermath of all of these events. Years in the future still, Simon experiences the repercussion of wearing the crown, the depression now sitting atop a sane mind, or rather a mind battling the prospect of insanity. And that to me is the tragedy of the Ice King's madness. The lunacy was a curse, yes, but it was a prison far more lenient than facing the horrors of the world sober. I love Adventure Time. It's one of my favorite cartoons of all time. Ice King is one of the reasons for that love. He has been through a lot and more. He lost his princess, his only companion, his sanity, and 1,000 years later, he goes through that again, only this time without the anesthesia of lunacy. He is a character that deserves to be studied deeper in the future, just not by a goober like me. He is a sympathetic villain done right, for slowly as he sheds his role as an antagonist, we get to understand him more. Sure, he does mischief here and there, but always we are reminded that we, the audience, should look over him, forgive him, answer his plea for help, and understand the true tragedy in madness.